Let me just introduce the panelists you have not yet met. Did we lose Sarah? She's coming? I don't know where Sarah went. Sarah will join us in just a minute. Let me introduce Al Kresta, a man who really needs no introduction. But for 25 years, Al has served as president and CEO of Ave Maria Radio. He's first of all a missionary called to make Christ known and demonstrate that the Catholic faith offers a rational view of the world, a deep sense of spirituality, a firm family life, enhanced human relationships, creative use of reason and scholarship, and the creation of a culture of life and love. He looks at all areas of life through the lens of Scripture and the teachings of the Catholic Church. And since 1987, he's logged about 20,000 hours of live radio by hosting multi-hour daily talk program now called Kresta in the Afternoon. Today, the program is syndicated by EWTN, the world's largest religious media corporation, and is heard daily on 380 local stations nationwide, as well as on Sirius satellite radio and many other platforms. He's the author of many books. And after high school, Al spent a year living on the street trying to make it as a guitarist. He's a very talented musician. And after a brief stint at Berklee College of Music in Boston, Al moved to Michigan, where in 1976 he became an honors graduate from Michigan State University. And since then, he has done graduate work in theology at Sacred Heart and at Ashland Theology Seminary. He's a lifelong learner with a library of over 30,000 books and 20,000 electronic volumes. Yeah. Al and his wife Sally have been joined both in matrimony and mission since 1977. They're both lay Dominicans and have been blessed with 5 children on earth, 2 in heaven, and at least 20 grandchildren. You may have more than that now. I've lost count. I'd also like to introduce Amanda Garred. She is in her 3rd year as our college counselor here at FGR and her 9th year as a counselor in schools in the Diocese of Lansing. Before that, Amanda worked for 8 years in community mental health counseling. Amanda is a fully licensed professional counselor in the state of Michigan and received her master's in counseling in 2007. Amanda and her husband Brian both work at FGR and have 2 children, Elsa and Samuel. And then I want to introduce Sarah Thomm. Sarah is Jen and Nick's daughter, and she's a junior here at FGR and was just on retreat and left early to come be here with us. So we're thrilled to have you part of this broader community. We're thrilled to have you here today. We're so encouraged by your courage, your faith, and your maturity. So thank you for being here with us.
We've got a lot to talk about. And the questions are really quite good, and it makes it easy for me. First of all, let me say that a number of cards here were explicitly to say thank you to you.
Thank you.
What you've done in taking a stand. And
thank you so much.
Let me start, if you don't mind, since we just heard Jen. I'm going to start. I'm going to ask Sarah a question first off, okay? When did you first realize, your mom mentioned that, in a sense, you were living under that umbrella of suffering all your life. When did it first dawn on you that you were in an unusual situation?
I don't know if I could pinpoint a specific time. I was born into it. They found out they were pregnant with me the same week they found when he got his diagnosis. So I always, especially when I was younger, had this, I knew that my dad probably wasn't going to be there for as long as everybody else's was, that he was going to be gone before my friends' dads were gone. But I think as a kid, I had this, I had the childlike hope of maybe not, maybe he'll be fine, maybe we'll be good.
Yeah.
And then I think that 3 years in 2017 when we found out when he started declining, and then especially that 3 months after we found out that we had no treatment left, it was very real. He's going to be gone. He's not going to be there when I graduate from high school. He's not going to be there for my homecoming. He's not going to be there for prom. He's not going to be there when I get married. He's not going to be there when I have kids. Yeah, but I don't know if I can pinpoint a specific time when I realized, oh, this is real.
Amazing experience that you have had. Mm-hmm. And what did you find most helpful once you realized that you grew to realize that he could be taken from you, and in all likelihood would be taken from you before these pivotal moments in your life. What did you do with that? What kept you faithful? Did you kick the wall? Did you scream? I mean, what worked for you?
Prayer. Yeah, I don't know. I just really leaned on the Lord that, like, yeah, he's going to be gone, and maybe I don't have that earthly father figure, but everything that he was, in the ways that he was an incredible father to me, that the Lord is so much better than that, and he is the fulfillment of everything that my earthly father was, and that even if I don't have him anymore, that first of all, hopefully that he's in heaven and still there, he's interceding for me, but that can be fulfilled by the Lord and doesn't have to be fulfilled by my earthly father who's not here anymore.
So you were able to really began to see God as your heavenly Father, as a way of working? Yeah,
I really grew into that relationship of, like, he is my father, I am his daughter.
Very good. Very good. Amanda, let me go to you. You had, a dozen years or so in working with high school students. Have things changed much in the 12 or 13 years that you've been active?
Yeah, I think that they have, definitely, from the beginning until now. I always say, kids are kids, no matter what school they're in, no matter what home they're in, they're all developing and becoming. And I try to look at it, as our world develops and our nation develops, and sort of in that context that, kids are always going to be kids. The way that we approach things therapeutically looks maybe a little different than it did even 12 years ago. I think you spoke a little bit to that. But, I try to, when I'm looking at these kids, being distracted on so many different levels by so many different things, I try to think about being like a good, just basic listening ear for them. Sometimes they don't experience silence, as we've talked about and Dr. Chavy mentioned. We don't experience enough silence in our day. And I don't know, a few weeks ago when everyone lost power, I read this funny little meme that said, my family lost power and internet for a few days, so we had to sit together for dinner, and I found out they're a really nice group of people. And so I just laughed at that, but I thought, how true is this? Like, how often do we sit down and experience one another? So I try to think about that, when I'm working with kids on their future plans, or when I'm working with them on mental health needs, different things like that. So I don't know if that totally answers your question, but
very helpful. And then I'm going to throw one question at you, and Tom, I'd like you to take it up as well. How do you help? This is a very specific question. How do you help a teen who has struggled with depression for 2 years when the teen does not want to talk about it? The teen does well. Excuse me, get my glasses on here. The teen is doing well in academics and athletics, but depression, 2 years, not talking about it. What do you say, Amanda?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, again, I don't think that it's the words we say. It's sort of that presence for them. I think if we look back to our own, childhood and youth experiences, sometimes the environment we're in, we can pinpoint a person that was a mentor to us, or a person that didn't really have, like, the piece of advice, but just their presence and the fact that they sort of rallied around them during that time of their life, speaks volumes. So I saw this picture recently of a father father next to a son. It was actually a statue somewhere, and the father has holes all over his body, and the statue of the son was constructed from the holes that they took from the father's body. And so I try to imagine, like, as we are influences on our students here at FGR, like, we are leaving pieces of what we give of ourselves and filling the holes that are present in these students' lives. And so hopefully, we don't always see the fruits of it today or tomorrow, but it's neat. I'm old enough now to where I'll see these kids in the community with their own families, and they'll stop myself or my husband, who taught them history, 20 years ago, and say, hey, something you said helped me in a time of my life that you never knew, and I just want to let you know that. So I think sometimes our presence and just sort of rallying around them can be, influential in ways we don't know.
Thomm, I'll repeat the question for you as well. How do you help a teen who has struggled with depression for 2 years when the teen does not want to talk about it? The teen is doing well in academics and athletics.
Yeah, I would champion right off from what you said. I was thinking of a father that said that often his influence was important, but it was the other adult men in this young man's life that made the difference. Because often these others can say what and be heard in what the father couldn't say or be heard in saying. And so it goes back to where there's a lot of good research about this idea of connectedness, and it's in the family is important, but it's that community that you bring along, mentors and coaches and folks. The second thing I think is that what I hear in that is, in the example, is that our culture can be very driven by this notion of what success is. And I think high-achieving families and high-achieving kids, we can inadvertently give those messages. I've heard parents say, I've never told them that grades were important, or that being successful on the field was the most important thing. But what were the conversations around the house? What were the things that were talked about? And if it's almost all about that, our kids are sharp. They pick up on what is of value. And so I would also not only champion the idea of mentors and connections and coaches and teachers, and I'm honest, I wouldn't be here if it hadn't been for a good coach and an uncle, but it's got to be that there has to be something more to what it means to be successful. And I think, it's not the thing you can kind of tell a young person. It's the notion that you have to kind of live alongside and live with them. During the break, I was asked by someone of a practical thing they could do with their young person. And I remembered this parent who decided to, on Friday mornings, have breakfast, the other side of the day, with their young person, and they made some rules about it. He said, I'm going to take you out for breakfast, it's on me, but you and I are going to agree that we are not talking about what either of us should have done this week, what we needed to do this week, about school. It's all about hanging out. And if they needed to, they made a few ground rules, like it might be like, what's the most exciting thing that happened for you this week? But it was off bounds. And that piece kept the relationship going that wasn't about the inadvertent things around success. Has to be more than about sports and about school, because in the end of the day, those aren't the things that we're trying to instill, right? They're not that they're not important. It's just that probably we have to realize there's something we're living for that is more.
Would you say we have to learn how to waste time with our kids?
Yeah, I think busyness is one of the biggest culprits.
Yeah.
Because we're taught, right? I think that everyone believes that our kids being involved in something is supposed to be the most important piece. And it isn't. I'm just here to tell you. It's not how many teams you're on or what activities you're in or band and things. It's about what if they walk away with in being with you.
Kristen, when you came home from that Bible study. What did you say to your husband?
I don't exactly remember exactly what I said, but I do remember the feeling that I had that, it just like a softening of the heart. Hearing scripture, hearing about the Lord Jesus Christ, the promises of God, it really hit me hard, and I just remember a softening. And that softening obviously let then me be able to enter into encounter with others who the Lord was gracious enough to put into my life to be able to eventually come into the gift of baptism.
Yeah. What advice would you give grad students in medical or educational disciplines who encounter anti-life messages as part of the required training?
So, a couple things on that. So I do agree that once your ear is attuned to hearing these messages and looking out and hearing the dehumanization of the most vulnerable members of our human family, as you said, you start to see it everywhere. I almost make an analogy that like when you're learning to play an instrument and you're learning to tune like the A string on your violin, and at first like you don't know exactly what like A sounds like with your ear, but then after a while, once you know A, like you know if it's a little bit off, right? Just a little bit, and you're able to sort of notice, and you're sort of fine-tuning your ear. And so, when I hear these messages, and I hear them all the time, actually, my first response, and I think is something to think about for others, is that, I remember, the scripture where Jesus says, like, they do not know what they do, Lord. And I think of myself, of having those same feelings of being anti-life, and how I'm just grateful that I've had the revelation that I have to see the other side. And I also think it's important for us to remember how much trauma is in the space of abortion. So, if you give a talk about abortion, which I have, to a group of, let's say 100 people, 20 to 30% of people in that room will have had an abortion, paid for an abortion, driven someone to abortion, coerced a woman to have an abortion. And, through repentance, and the blood of Jesus Christ is sufficient to cover all sins. There's a lot of trauma there. And to sort of speak into that without the humility to understand that oftentimes abortion also is an unchoice, and women feel coerced to have an abortion relates with intimate partner violence. So there's humility when you hear those statements. There's a sense of compassion, again, and a sense of gratefulness that your eyes have been opened. And then practically what to do is always one of discernment. So recently, to give you an example, as a faculty member, I heard a talk that was given by one of my faculty members, one of our my colleagues at the hospital, to the doctoring students about systemic racism. And one of the examples of systemic racism that she presented was anyone who restricts access to reproductive health, is how she framed it. So if you were pro-life, basically she was saying you're a racist. And it was so unacceptable to me, And so as a faculty member, I was able to email, right, this person, she's one of my colleagues, and sort of say, hey, I take issue with this, actually. I think actually abortion is incredibly racist. Many people believe Margaret Sanger was a racist, and that there's basis in eugenics, and the abortion industry targets black women, and it's a very strong pro-black, pro-life movement, right? And they understand this. And so, where's this data? Like, how are you seeing this? For a trainee, there's a power differential. And then, so I think about, who are your trusted friendlies at your place? And maybe you can go to them, and they can go right to the colleague. Or maybe you do feel empowered with the help of your advisor, your mentor, to be able to approach the person with whom you disagree, if there's a power differential. But that's how it takes a lot of discernment in that space. But again, I think approaching it first with a sense of humility and understanding sometimes where these statements come from.
What percentage of your audience walked out on you that night?
It's hard to say. Hill Auditorium is a big place, and there were a lot of people there. I do think the reports of how many people walked out, I actually think were over-exaggerated. Like, definitely a good amount of people walked out, but the majority of the audience stayed.
Yeah.
And actually, you know, I was so focused when I saw the rustling happen. Actually, this big banner was like thrown down over the top balcony saying like abortion is healthcare, and then people stood up, and it was being like live streamed on YouTube. And so actually people who watched it at home like couldn't tell something had happened because once you stop talking, you lose it, right? So I couldn't even focus. But then watching the video afterwards, you know, a handful of people walked out. But I do remember even there was some attempt at self-correction in the audience. So when people stood up, someone in the audience shouted, "Shameful!" And there was like a little bit of stuff in the audience, but it was hard for me to keep total track of it because I was trying to focus on like just continuing.
And I think I always like when I tell this story, I always want to stress, you weren't there speaking on a pro-life message.
Correct.
You weren't giving a Christian testimony. I mean, and yet there was pressure brought on you simply for your unexpressed opinions, I mean, and convictions. This person has a daughter at University of Michigan Nursing School who dreams to work in the Mott, I think it's neonatal intensive care unit. She's a beautiful Christian pro-life heart, but I've often wondered if her dreams will be possible in the aggressively secular environment of Michigan medicine and modern medicine more broadly. You and Dr. Bishop give me hope. Do you have any advice for kids like my daughter?
Can I start?
Yeah,
okay.
please.
So I just want to encourage this person.
Okay.
We need strong pro-life advocates in the space of medicine. And it is possible. I think it is possible with, again, the help of building the networks. And I love how Dr. Bishop talked about how resilience comes out of strong interpersonal networks. And I'm reminded of Mother Teresa, who said, you know, if we have no peace, it's because we've forgotten that we belong to one another, that woman, that child is my brother and sister. And she said, it's not like that person's like my brother and sister, that person is my brother and sister. And what it means to have strong bonds, to be able to come out of this type of bolstering, to go back out into the world and proclaim life boldly. I think it's really tempting. I mean, I've been tempted, right? I've been recruited to some other places where I feel like, why am I struggling here? You know, I could be at a place where like actually what I say is actually people like it.
Exactly.
And so why am I like beating myself about this when I could have maybe an easier road? But I really feel like, you know, if we say, which we should, love our great public institutions, if everybody like us just leaves our public institutions, like that's awful. These places are places, and we should be the salt and the light in the world to be able to preserve these places and to also give encouragement to the other people that are there. And with the White Coat Ceremony, I can't tell you how many emails I received from within Michigan Medicine saying, I'm a PACU nurse, I work in environmental services, right? I'm a registered dietitian. I thought I was the only one.
Yeah.
I thought I was the only one. And again, if you're not visible, then people do think they're the only ones. And then because like the devil would want us to be totally fractured and separated and not be able to be together. So having that community of people that can bolster you and support you and to be convicted in what you believe. But I agree, it's not easy.
Mm-hmm.
I would add to that. I think you were asking.
Yeah, sure.
So I remember having a prayer partner back 20 years ago. And remembering that one of the things we were praying for together was where I would be called to. And realizing that one of the gifts would be to possibly be an intellectual voice to the intellectual about these kinds of things. And I would agree. I think that I'm sure that God calls folks into places to be an expression of Him in places where are uncomfortable. It's a mission, if you will. And I actually think that there is more and more of an opening, in a way, for theistic things to be discussed, because if the thing is, you got to kind of meet people where they're at, right? If the argument is about diversity and acceptance and these sorts of things, then that's what we're talking about. Yeah. And so pushing folks on the reality of what they're asking for, I think, is the place of that.
Diversity extends to Christians as well.
It extends to the conversation. And, there are a lot of medical schools around the country that actually have developed whole research arms and training on the interface of where theistic and spiritual and medical things are involved. Like Duke is one of the best and biggest in that environment. And there's full
curriculum. That's what you're doing here, right?
And
Yes, thanks.
yeah, I mean, and so for example, even the national organization working on cancer kinds of work is actually says it's unethical not to address spirituality in care. And so there are doorways opening. So I think it's just having mentors around to be aware of where those resources and where those conversations are, and to be well read and ready for the conversation.
Be prepared. Let me stay with you on that, if you don't mind. The question here was to you, Thomm. I love the emphasis of positive psychology, but it seems to run counter to most of what I see or read in modern psychology. Do you find an openness to this way of thinking and studying at University of Michigan or in your larger profession? There is so much work that can be done here to advance the flourishing of all people by focusing on our common humanity.
Even from secular psychology, I mean, the movement, as I shared, maybe in not enough detail, but if you were looking at the common intervention that you'll find, like if you were looking for a therapist today, a good part of what they're going to tell you is that they work from a cognitive behavioral perspective. And that's been a mainstay for a long time. But the next wave of that is actually folks that are secularists that recognize that our conception of psychology doesn't go far enough. And so even the area of acceptance and commitment therapy is just another way of looking at a therapeutic intervention that's cognitive. But values are inherently part of that discussion. So once you start opening the door for that, then now there's a whole room for the interface of talking about theistic sorts of things. And so I actually think that we are probably closer to where these fields can speak to each other than they ever have been.
Okay. No, very good. Yeah. Very, very encouraging. Sarah, let me come back to you. Do your friends believe that their Christian faith is under attack? Or do they think it's just not popular in the culture? Do they enjoy being different, or does being Catholic feel awkward, like having an extra set of teeth?
Yeah, so like Mr. Giordano said, me and my best friend just drove down from retreat to be here, and we'll be going back up there. So we were just talking about this in the car. We do feel like our faith is under attack. Like we just, if you just look at culture in this society that we're in right now, that we feel like we're being attacked just for who we are and what we believe. But there's also with it being unpopular, I don't know that it's becoming less popular. I feel like people are just a lot less willing to speak up about it because we are under attack. So it's like talking about Jesus, talking about what you believe, that maybe it's not unpopular, it's just that people are too scared to speak up about it because we feel like we're being attacked by other people. And we were also talking about that I think it goes both ways with it being awkward and it being a really beautiful thing. We have found a home in youth group. I have a really good group of friends. The youth group at Christ the King is incredible. I have a really good community here at FGR at the church, and it's a really beautiful thing, and we're excited. We're excited to just be with other people who think the same way that we do and love the Lord the same way that we do. But it's also then I go to Taekwondo and nobody wants to listen to me. Nobody cares. Nobody wants to listen to me talking about going to a Catholic school. I'm yeah, I'm thinking about moving to Ohio for college, and they're why? oh, because I want to go to Franciscan, because I want to go to a Catholic school. Sarah, why would you do that? You know, they don't want to listen. So I think it goes both ways, that it can be a really beautiful thing and it can be really exciting when you're with other people who think the same way that you do, but it can be really hard when you're surrounded by other people who don't.
Very good, thank you. When a tragic event occurs, like a school shooting, there's usually an availability of counselors. However, we rarely hear mention of religious ministers, pastors, priests, though they might be among the counselors. Any comment on that?
Yeah, I would tell you that even there are actually guidebooks and guidelines in terms of like how schools should address an incident that happens. And I've seen some of these materials, and I think that there's probably more out there of acceptance of local ministers being involved. I think that where it gets cloudy is there's a misunderstanding of the tension between trying to not create a situation of copycat or idealizing, particularly if there's suicides and things, if I'm being just blatant. And so trying not to let things get out of hand. So out of that attempt, it becomes too controlling where it limits some of the community from being involved. So let me give some examples. So I've been part of where school districts were trying not to idealize, so they wouldn't let like any, you know, decorating of lockers or idealizing things. They wanted to not have a lot of fanfare, if you will. Well, out of that becomes maybe a dismissing of an ability to heal, and then you're not involving maybe youth pastors and the like. But on the other hand of that, you're also not sort of creating snowball effects. So I honestly think in those moments of crisis, folks don't know what to do and where the tension is. And so there's a lot of listening. I've seen it work best when there's been a great relationship between the school and the spiritual community, and whether it happened within the school where they allowed that and invited that in, or it happened next to the school. I honestly just personally don't think that you can't dismiss the community from being involved. I think it's building those relationships ahead of time and fostering some of those connections so that when the crisis happens, you're at the table. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we spent a lot of time when Columbine happened, and also when there was that terrible shooting in Connecticut. And so we did a lot of interviewing with people who wanted to talk, most parents that didn't want to talk at that stage of it. But there's absolutely no doubt that priests and pastors were very much a part of the healing community there. And I don't know how well that's covered in the mainstream press, but they're definitely there. Yeah.
And I would tell you that it's just as important the days to months after than the days and the week after. I spent probably a couple of years with this community that had a horrific event happen, and it was really about having that community awareness. And I think that's where the faith community can be incredible. It's having the long view.
This is a long one, but I very good. I mean, it's something that raises a very specific matter, and I'll read it. Beginning shortly after June 2022, public intellectual and theologian Elizabeth Bruenig proposed one specific new political project for the pro-life movement: Make Birth Free. As further developed by Democrats for Life of America, the proposal to make birth free means that Medicare would be tasked with covering every cost of prenatal care, birth, and postnatal care for pregnant American women and their babies. Medicare already pays for wraparound care for end-stage renal disease. The Make Birth Free proposal is to extend this part of our American safety net to pregnancy as well. I'm not asking whether this is a good idea in general. Rather, I'm asking the doctors on the panel if there are any hidden hazards of Medicare payment and bureaucracy that advocates of making birth free should keep in mind when encouraging our legislators to prioritize American pregnancies so as highly in our spending as we prioritize Ukrainian territorial integrity. So there's a good one for you.
Do you want me to go?
Yeah, I can start. That is just like the spicy meatball question right there.
I like that.
Do I wade into that question very carefully? So my disclaimer is that I'm not a policy expert, nor am I a healthcare economist. But I do have, when I think about, specifically about abortion, we do know, again, as I've said, that abortion oftentimes is an unchoice. And for women, if you ask the American, average US woman, she actually wants to have more children than she's having. And there are many reasons for that. But what can we do if we think we would want abortion to be unthinkable? What can we do as a society to have policies that promote life? Choosing of life. And it seems like that would include, expansion of Medicaid, right, to women who live behind the poverty line, and to be able to extend child tax credits, and to be able to promote policies that make abortion unthinkable. When I was giving this talk last night to some college students on campus, and someone was asking me about the role of law in this situation, do I believe there should be legal restrictions around such and such, right? And again, ideally, I'm an idealist. I think hopefully we wouldn't need law someday because no one would even think that it's okay to kill their unborn baby, right? But until that's the case, I do believe that we need laws to be able to protect the most vulnerable. And also, I'm sort of still thinking about this, but I do believe the law has a pedagogical action. The law teaches what we believe to be acceptable or not. And specifically, as a pro-lifer, I also don't believe that physician-assisted suicide euthanasia is healthcare. And so I think about the laws in several states right now that basically are teaching people who we value and what we value. And if the laws in some states that promote, that allow you to kill yourself and actually say it's actually a noble act to do so, the law should be aligned with natural law, saying there is something about you actually that matters. There's actually something very valuable about you, and we want you here, and it's not okay to kill yourself, right? But if that law isn't there, you're less likely to see that special quality, not only in yourself, but other people. So again, I do believe there is a role of law. I do believe there is a role of prioritization around finances. How to do that, I leave to the experts.
Yeah, and I would just add that I remember a piece of this argument that came out during when Roe v. Wade was up, and there was a lot of back and forth, right, in our culture about that. And one of the pieces that came out of that seems to be at a root of this was the notion, are those that are pro-life willing to go far enough to say that you're willing to stand in the gap and support and really be? And I think that is the call. Are we bold enough to be the full expressions of the hands and feet of God in our community, or are in Jesus, an expression of Jesus, or are we just in verse? And I think that's a bold question. And so I think in terms of policy and consistency, and even the way, as you had shared earlier, in science, I think there's lots of, frankly, great room for the intellectual scientific conversations in law and policy. But it's really, at the root, are we willing to be bold enough to really be the expression of that? Or are we saying we're only going to go so far? And those around us, I think, are right to call us out.
Yeah.
Are we willing to be that bold?
Yeah. And I'll just add that part of the problem is that there's such extraordinary suspicion and polarization in the political realm that to have a serious conversation like that would be almost miraculous.
Yeah,
right.
right.
But I agree 100% that this is really worthwhile.
And I know we're running out of time, but I think to avoid the political tribalism that happens around abortion transcends politics.
Yeah.
This isn't an issue of right or left, or
That's right.
the Republicans or Democrats. This is an issue between light and darkness.
Amen.
And this is not something that falls into some kind of should not fall into some kind of political tribalism.
I agree.
Exactly.
Amanda, I want to rephrase a question that I said to Sarah earlier about students here at Richard. Generally speaking, and I know kids are different and all that. We have 5 of them, so. But do they generally see themselves as Catholics who are on the outs of the mainstream of our culture? Or do they see themselves as mission-minded in that they're supposed to enter the mainstream of our culture? How would you do what you can with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think with anything, of course, there's a mixture, but I think for the most part, our kids are well prepared when they leave here to go out into the mainstream culture. So, like, obviously I do the college advising here and some counseling, so I see where they go when they leave here, and, it's a great mixture. There are kids that feel called to go to an authentically, Catholic college right away. Some kids say, no, I'm ready to take on a big school like U of M or Michigan State. And I think that they are well prepared. I hope that we are helping them become well prepared to go out and fulfill their mission. I mean, one of the things that from the moment they start here as a freshman, when I meet with them individually, I talk to them about this, about, like really pray into your calling and what God has for your life and how He is going to lead you to that. And don't be afraid of something outside of the bubble, and so kind of one of our missions this year at our school, and I get brownie points, right, for saying this, is building authentic relationships. And we talk about, like, the relationships that we build here will help us. And I think the whole panel has talked about, like, the mentors and the relationships they've built along the way that they carry into the secular world, and leaning on those people when they encounter what they're going to encounter in adversity in life. But, I think in general, I think our kids are well prepared and bold in, from the time they come in as a freshman to when they graduate as a senior.
Very good. Thomm, talk more about a yearly adventure for your family, what you wanted to achieve, what types of things you did.
Yeah. So very quickly, I was inspired, and there are materials out there like this. They're a little dated now. But essentially, I was challenged by some others to be intentional in this. And so when my kids reached around puberty, 12, 13, they had to help plan an adventure. And on that, it fit what their personality was. They had some free reign in that. And they knew going into the weekend that was going to be a weekend where it was going to be a lot of fun, but we were also going to talk about girls or boys, depending. We were going to talk about life, goals, things like that, and they could ask me any kind of question. And so I remember backpack trips. My daughter was the quiet one. I gave her 6 questions ahead of time, and we canoed. She wanted to canoe, which was great because I was up front, she was in the back. She didn't have to look at me. But she still talks of that time, and I gave them a symbol to represent that weekend that they still hold on to. And then when they became seniors, so I want to point out this was a progression. So I brought along any men and women that were involved in their lives, and we did a hike where they walked with each of them for a period of time. And I asked each of them to share with them one life thing you wanted to make sure you left with them, and so that they understood these other people in their lives. And then there's a notion of giving a blessing later on in life. And I'm still working towards that with these adult children now about what that blessing might be from a parent. But essentially, don't get lost with maybe all of that, and I'm not here to talk about me in that, but the idea that there really, and I could give you references to this, there's something important about having an intentional rituals that help raise where we're directing our kids. And I think that's true, and if you look back in your own life. instead of it just being happenstance and you fall into things, maybe there's a way we could orchestrate that. And that's what I'm suggesting.